you guys would, give a hand to Andréa and Darla Snavely as they come up and join me. One neat thing with Andréa in particular is he was one of my professors when I was at Central Bible College in Missouri. So good things you can thank him for, bad things you can blame him for.
That's right.
He contributed to shaping me into who I am as a pastor. So there's some history there.
Yeah, don't just blame me. I wasn't the only one.
No, not the only one, but I loved his classes. He didn't have any multiple choice or true false on his tests. Everything was a short answer, a fill in the blank, an essay. If you didn't know it, you weren't going to do well. And I don't think that endeared him to a ton of students,
right.
But the ones that
That's
it did, it was very, very good. I was thankful for it. But Andréa, if you and Darla could just, I know you, but if you guys could share a little bit, just a brief about yourselves and
Okay.
Let us get to know you.
I'll let Darla tell a little bit about our family and us.
Okay, sounds good. I don't know if I have this on.
Is that on? Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Okay. There we go. Thank you. First of all, thank you for having us here this morning. What a pleasure. Beautiful setting. Your church is gorgeous. And of course, I love the Southern hospitality. But Andréa and I, we have 2 married children, 4 grandchildren. We have a daughter-in-law and a son-in-law. And God has blessed us beyond, we prayed over them when they were little and just prayed for their spouses, and it's so true. As children, we pray over our children for, them to grow up and serve God. But also, I really believe it's important to pray over their future too. And we, our grandchildren, we just love them and adore them. They're 12, 6, 3, and 2. 2 boys and 2 girls. But anyway, Andréa and I in our life, we've been married 32 years. And we've pastored. And God, through the years, has taken us to the point where we are now in serving God in missions. Andréa is a professor. I worked at Evangel University in administration for 15 years, and one of my top strengths is strategic. So in what we're going to be doing, that is going to be very important. But we feel very honored to be here and excited about the ministries. I'm licensed in South Texas as a minister. He's been ordained for over 30 years. So we both have our ministries, but we also minister together as well.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you, if you spent time as youth pastors, as pastors, and then went to being a professor, which is where I met you, what did some of that transition look like, going from pastoring to teaching at one of the universities and then to missions?
Well, I have to say most of that transition looked very ugly.
Yeah, it did.
We won't talk about any of those things, though, right? No, seriously. Some of it was pretty difficult, I have to be honest. Some of it was not. I mean, just all kinds of different ways that God has led us through the years. I guess mainly probably 2 transitions were the most important, maybe, looking back on all those years, but probably going from pastoring back into graduate school was a major transition. We had dinner Friday night with your pastor and Gina, and told a little bit more about that, which I won't go into that great a detail here. But God worked His will in our lives, sometimes in spite of some of my decisions, and so. And God does that. Aren't you glad that God works in spite of us sometimes? But Darla is actually the one that really encouraged me to go back to school, and so when I did, several years had gone by between graduating from. I graduated from Central Bible College as well, and actually 9 years went by between that and going back to graduate school. So,
and you were pastoring the whole time?
Well, youth pastoring, yeah. And so as you can imagine, I tell people the guy I was from 22 to 32 was like two different people. So, but even though I grew up in the church, and my dad was a pastor, and all, so it wasn't as drastic of a change for other people looking at my life as it was for me just observing myself, I think, is what I'm really referring to. But when I went back to school, I just went back to school because I thought as a pastor that I needed to know more and all. So just for my ministry, personally preaching and teaching. And so, but when I went back, things started to change. And I didn't know, and Darla didn't know, any of this that would happen. In fact, when I was at CBC, maybe you even remember me talking about this in my classes, but I try to encourage students that no matter what kind of a student they were, that they needed to just try to finish. And for some students, just finishing is a major hurdle. And sadly, some couldn't even do that for a variety of reasons. But the reason I encourage students to just finish is because, like myself, I had no idea what was going to happen 10, 15, 20 years later. Only God knew that. But I encourage them to put themselves in a place where they did the very best at what God was calling them to do at the moment, and to put themselves in a place where there'd be opportunities for God to take them on and use them into doing various things down the road in the future. And so that's what happened in my life for 10 years. I really didn't know, but when I went back to school, I did so much better than what I ever could have imagined when I was younger. And so one thing just led to another. I finished a Master's of Divinity at the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary, went on to into another master's degree at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, and then we moved there with our family when our kids were little. And that was a great experience working in an inner city church. And so then got into the PhD program, and then the dean of Central Bible College called me one spring day in 2000. I don't know what that was, 2002, I guess. It's been a long time ago, nearly 20 years ago. Yeah, nearly 20 years ago now that I got a call. And we went back to Springfield to interview there, and they hired me. So we moved back to Springfield, and so I taught there at Central Bible College for 8 years. And so then another major transition happened. The second major one was when, I won't go into all the details here, but I left Central Bible College, and I got to talking to some folks at Global University. And I was telling Dominic this morning a little bit about the connections that we have with missionaries from the Ivory Coast, Dominic's home country. And so in talking to these different missionaries, mainly the older missionary, Willard Teague, helped me to get hired on at Global University. So that was a transition that happened in our lives that was difficult, I have to say, but when God does difficult things in your life, when you have a difficult situation, I guess I had already learned enough, and Darla, was like an anchor to help me, and I helped her, and we helped our kids. Our son was a freshman in college. Our daughter was a freshman in high school at the time. It was very difficult, but I guess we'd already learned enough and knew enough in life to just hang on to God and know that He had something that we had no idea what He was doing. And literally, it was blind. You talk about blind faith. Have you ever had to have blind faith?
I call it ugly faith.
Yeah, it's called, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's not blind because you know that God is working.
Right. We see, right, like faith, like Hebrews talks about. It's the evidence of things not seen. when you have the Holy Spirit working in your life, you know that God is doing something for the good.
Yeah.
That really makes Romans 8:28 make sense. And okay, I told him that even in this interview thing, I could really start preaching. So,
but it's even like the
I
song
won't
we
preach,
sang
I'm
this
sorry.
morning. You
Right.
know, even though I can't see it, you're working. Even though I can't feel it, you're working. Even if none of this is making any sense to me at all,
Right.
I trust that God is working. And you've seen the fruit of that, and now He has you in missions.
Right.
So what are you guys doing in missions? What are you going to be doing in France? And how is that all coming together?
Well, Darla can talk a little bit about that.
Well, our first, we've been in Belgium, and André was a professor at our Continental Theological Seminary. And from the first day we arrived in Belgium, I got in contact with a group called the Breaking Chains Network. It's where they help women get out of sex trafficking and get legal with the government there. And my time there, I would go down in one of the largest red light districts in Europe. Prostitution is legal in Europe, but the selling of individuals is not. Of course not. It's awful the way these people are abused and the way they have to live. You know, people think, they're a prostitute, they're down in the red light district, they want to be there, they don't want to be there. They trusted somebody in their lifetime and they ended up there hoping for a better life like we all do. Well, anyway, outside the district there is a Oasis Center where we would invite these individuals. We go window to window. In a 24-hour period, there would be 540 working windows. They do 12-hour plus shifts. So it's something that the mind can't even comprehend. TV does not even portray how horrible their lives are and how they are treated. Every entrance of the red light district is guarded by men. We go down as teams. We take dogs with us, and we take Jesus number one, And so, anyway, I don't have time to go into everything, but God is working miracles, even in the armpit of society, the armpit of a city where you think, how in the world does anybody go down into that? But with God's protection, these people are doing an incredible ministry there. Well, anyway, once they come to the Oasis, we would do computer lessons, English lessons. We would, number one, do devotions. We would feed them on a china, and this would be Monday and Thursday evenings. We would go down about 5:15, and then at night, we would go down at 10:30 at night or so, 11, and that was another whole level. Young. I just want to take them all home with me. But anyway, so that ministry is an incredible ministry, and the seminary there is incredible. But changing direction, God has, and André can tell you even more depth, but has opened doors for us working with the Missionaries people in France. They're from the Ivory Coast. They're wonderful people. Pelagie and Samuel Yeo, they went there 20 years ago. They're a couple that they went there as missionaries to France, and they've started over 30 churches. They plan on in the years to come to start that many or more all throughout Europe. They told us they prayed for over 10 years for a couple to come alongside them, Assembly of God missionary couple to come alongside them. And we were that couple, and they're rejoicing every day that God opened doors. And He had to open doors for us to be able to go and do the ministries we're going to do. I'm going to be, of course, helping in the Bible college alongside André, but I'm really excited about this ministry. It's called the Good Samaritan Outreach. Pelagie and the Missionaries people there have started this outreach where they feed and clothe the immigrants coming into Europe with nothing. I mean, in our video later, you'll see that they literally, with children, sleep on the streets. It's the saddest thing. It rips your heart out of your chest. and these people, they want a life too. And the outreach, the Mistat people they have to cook and buy clothing and books cheap, and they sell them so they can help these people. So my goal is to try to bring resources from the United States and Europe and build this program and help them so there are more resources so they can even reach more. And, these people are being won to Jesus. Muslim people, they are coming to the church. They're being saved. God is moving. Europe is a godless place. Churches are empty, these beautiful buildings. But this group of people, they're forward thinking, they're workers, they love Jesus, and they are doing a work there in Europe, and we are so excited to come alongside them.
Mm-hmm.
So are you still going to be doing any work with, was that Oasis?
Well, okay, that's the Breaking Chains. Okay, so over in, and I meant to mention this as well, my role will be, the leaders there said that they have been praying for someone to come. There are individuals that work in the sex trafficking or minister in the sex trafficking, I should say. But what I plan on doing with that particular ministry is doing some conferences, workshops, raising up the Mistat people to recognize there are people that are being trafficked out of Europe. It's a horrible problem. And so on that part, I don't know exactly how it's all going to work until I get there, to be honest. But I know God's put that on my heart like He did when we worked in Belgium. And I do have all the resources from individuals that are already planted. And but in France, it's another whole level. In the sex trafficking, it's very dangerous. They do a lot of it out in the parks. You just have to be careful how it's all designed and how, me personally, right now when I go down into a red light district, it's dangerous, very dangerous, but it's another whole level in France. And I plan on getting connected even with the individuals that have boots on the ground, but I with what I feel that God has directed me to do there is awareness and raising up leaders that they can sustain. Say, if I'm here in the United States, or whatever, they can fulfill the calling, what God's called them to do to help their people as well.
Yeah, there's been a lot of women that have been trafficked out of Africa, West Africa, up through northern Africa, across the Mediterranean. They go to Italy. And then once they get into Italy, they can be trafficked all through the major cities of Europe. But so this West African immigrant church, Mistat, really
what does
can have.
Mistat
Well, it's Ministère Évangélique International Salut pour tout Assemblée à Dieu.
Did he get it right?
Is that close?
Yeah.
That's close, okay?
Yeah, it's close.
So you can see why we say Mistat.
Yeah.
Right? But it's the actually, and Darla touched on this, this group has been there for 20 years, and the Assemblies of God World Missions has not had any contact really with this group of churches other than these missionaries from the Ivory Coast, mainly the Teague family, Willard Teague and his two sons that are missionaries in Ivory Coast, have helped Samuel and Pelagie Yeo to start a school there. They started about 13 years ago.
So this was something like some believers in Ivory Coast, God put on their heart to go start a school.
Right. They went to France specifically to reach the immigrants going from Ivory Coast and other French-speaking West African nations to that are going to Europe. So,
which I just want to, so we get in this mentality sometimes that we feel like the United States is the only country sending missionaries, and And I don't know where we get that from, but I think that tends to be our view, is like we're the only ones sending missionaries around the world. But there are missionaries from every country going to every other country. There are missionaries from other countries coming to the United States. I mean, really, there are, because there are parts of our country that are very unreached,
right?
Or maybe overreached, or however you want to put it. But so these were missionaries from Ivory Coast that went to France to reach the immigrants coming to France from some of their home countries.
Right. Yeah, and they're even doing a missions work in Romania. So, and reaching Romanians. So, yeah, what you're saying about missions the last 30, 40 years, because of immigration and because of Pentecostalism, which Assemblies of God is a part of the larger Pentecostal movement, probably it's been, I don't know, I read a lot of things, but I don't know specifically, probably 10, 15 years ago, the nations of Brazil and the nations of South Korea surpassed the number of missionaries they were sending more than the United States. Okay? So the largest churches in Brussels, Belgium, are made up of Brazilians from the nation of Brazil, running 1,000, 2,000 people. And so we talk about Europe, it's very unchristian, we could say post-Christian, but there's a lot of, we think that the European nations, because the Reformation happened there, and Christendom, Constantinianism we call it, or Christendom happened in Europe, and then of course the United States and Canada is a product of that. But and I've studied this extensively in my years of studies. But there was so much of Europe that was not Christianized. So much of Europe did not experience the Reformation. And so you could almost see it as though Christianity was just in different pockets of Europe during different time periods, and maybe it was strong in one place at one time, and then that fell off and it went someplace else. But overall, you could almost make a case that the Roman society, the Roman government, and the Roman culture, you studied the ancient Greco-Roman Empire and the paganism, really. I mean, I don't know what else you could say about it, but the worship of the Roman gods. That was so much more influential in Roman culture, in European culture and society than Christianity was. So now in Europe, probably most of the nations of Europe would have between 1 and 3%. 3% on the high side of people who would be a professing evangelical Christian. Yeah.
And that's just professing.
That's
not
people,
necessarily living.
Well, that's probably people who actually do go to church some. Yeah, would go to an evangelical church.
But that wouldn't be like the people who are actually following Jesus with their life day in, day out.
That would be probably, between 1 and 3% are actually professing, living, acting, believing and professing and acting out their faith. No more than 2.5 to 3%. Agnosticism, atheism is, you would say, probably the dominant. Maybe no religion at all would be the dominant religion of Europe. So just about 5 years ago or 6, the regional director of Europe, Paul Tremontosi, and the regional director of Africa, Greg Beggs, both started strategizing together of how they could use these African immigrants and even Brazilians, South American, other immigrants that are going to Europe. How could they use them to even reach the European nationals? And so this MISTAT group, even though the primary focus is reaching African immigrants, they're also reaching some nationals. So they have a couple churches in London. They have some churches in Switzerland, northern Italy, but most of them, of course, are in France and southern Belgium, Switzerland, Luxembourg, the nations that speak French. Obviously, French-speaking people want to go to a country that speaks French, but they're also moving to Italy and England, other places where they have to learn another language. So, so it's very fluid and dynamic because of the immigration, and so the church now and missions agencies are having to adapt and think of new strategies, to help reach the lost. So we will be the first ones that will actually be living in France, working with this group. And so even our leadership, as we've talked with them the last couple years, and which has led up to us being approved to do this new ministry, they were very excited about it. Because now it gives them an opportunity, and they kind of see us as liaisons between the national churches like the French Assemblies of God or the UK Assemblies of God and this MISTAC group to form closer alliances and partnerships. Not that they'll ever be together as one, we don't know, but yet, even if not, we can facilitate these groups working together, doing projects together, ministry together, and even with the last 3 years teaching at Continental Theological Seminary in Brussels, I think just this fall, or last fall or this spring, they were starting their teaching the classes at their extension center in Paris. So with the school, and I need to hurry up and talk about this part, the school there that these missionaries helped Samuel and Pelagie Yeo start this school about 13 years ago. They're in Cergy, France, north of Paris. People who are wanting to plant new churches or pastor churches or work in a church would have to come there and take classes. Well, they've had as many as 55 students in a class there. Well, here's one good thing about the pandemic. You ready to hear some good news about the pandemic? They had to put their classes online on Zoom. The first class, they didn't have 55, they exactly doubled to 110.
Wow.
And not just people who had to come there to the location in Cergy, but others in Europe who could not make the arrangements to come there and sit in the class were able to take these classes. So they had students from 3 or 4 countries in Africa. They had students from 3 or 4 nations in Europe. They had students from Quebec. And now one of Willard's sons, Tim, they're in North Texas, so they've been working with the North Texas district in Dallas-Fort Worth area where they've had so many immigrants come from Ivory Coast and other West African nations that Tim helped the district start a district school of ministry in French in Dallas. So see how all of this is just so, in fact, I called Tim before church, and Tim was talking to Dominique in French, So I haven't talked to Tim,
and Tim's in Dallas.
Tim's in Dallas.
Teaching people in French.
Right. And he's the one that's kind of helping get this online and develop this. So they'll be in Dallas, they'll be in Abidjan, Ivory Coast, we'll be in Paris area. So the potential of this school, okay, is just beyond what we
global.
can even.
It's an international.
It's going to be an international school of ministry for French-speaking people, no matter where they are.
And so primarily, you're going to be in France, but you're not even really working with the French people per se. You're training African immigrants. Mm-hmm. to reach the French in France, as well as any other French-speaking, you don't even have to say French-speaking nation, but French-speaking community around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Tremendous influence.
And he's given me connection. We'll be back down in this area a couple weeks from now, actually south of Atlanta, but Dominic gave me the names of a couple of pastors here in the Atlanta area that have actually French-speaking congregations. So this is still developing. Even Tim is making contacts around the United States now of people he doesn't even know. So when people immigrate, can you imagine? Well, I can't imagine. I mean, other than just going to Europe, but I haven't actually immigrated to live in Europe the rest of my life. But when you immigrate someplace, only an immigrant would understand this dynamic of going to another culture. Now, most of these are going to be speaking French, so it's not like they have to maybe learn a different language. Some of them are having to learn English in London or Italian, in Italy. But even just a different culture, you're taking your family to another nation. And, of course, it's important for people to be together. So if they can form a community, they're going to stay in that community. And it might take 2 or 3 generations for their children to grow up and learn that language and that culture, to assimilate within the wider culture. But for the first or second generation, it's very important, for them to have their church and their community and all. And as I was going to say a while ago, with CTS starting this extension site in Paris, they also, on the CTS side, see us as possibly liaisons between this undergraduate degree program of MISTAT and the French program of CTS. So CTS in Brussels has about their program split about 50-50. About half is in English and the other half is in French. So here's what's so amazing. When I was teaching at CTS in Brussels, I was amazed at these African immigrant young people. Now, most of them were second-generation immigrants, so meaning their parents had immigrated there. But CTS is made up of students from 30 to 35 nations of the world. Well, there were also some students in the French program that had come from, like, Cameroon. I don't think we had anybody from the Ivory Coast, but very, very good students. I mean, really sharp young people. And one student from Luxembourg, he was an African immigrant, but it was his parents or grandparents that had came, he was born in Europe. But this guy took one of my classes. His name was Michael. André. His last name was my first name. But sharp young guy. But he was in the French program, and I asked him one day, I said, why are you taking my class in English? And he said, well, I realized that English is, the language that, everybody wants to learn. I need to learn English better. So he said, I want to take your class so I can learn English better. I'm like, now that's a very aggressive, student that's really wanting to learn and apply themselves, And so, this whole dynamic of immigrants going to Europe is like, it's just like God has not forgotten about Europe. That's what's so interesting to me, is that even if God has to take people from Africa and put them into Europe, it's kind of like a shot in the arm. It's like a boost of energy. And if you'll see a little bit, just a clip in our video of some of the music that they play and they sing. I mean, I tell people, it can even make an old white guy like me want to get up and dance. But you don't want to see that because it's not very pretty. But these people are so energetic, and a lot of their students in the school have already had a bachelor's degree, and some have master's degrees in other fields, but yet they want to help plant churches. They want to help pastor. And so they've created almost a system, and this is from the Ivory Coast Assemblies of God. Their expectations and their requirements for pastors are so high, they can hardly even meet them. In other words, they don't have the resources, the people, the time, the money, all that it takes to help young people study for the ministry. They don't have enough resources to help the students meet the qualifications that they demand of them. So it's a high level, but they're trying to raise the level. And so that's why they really ask us to come alongside them. Now, we have our work cut out for us. It's going to be quite a challenge. I'll have to be honest. Sometimes, when you lay your head down, you're just about ready to go to sleep at night, you think about things that you tried to put off during the day. Some of these thoughts come to my mind. I'm like, the challenges that we're going to face there sometimes can be a little overwhelming. But with all that, I think what we said a while ago of how God has led us through the years gives us that confidence that we're just going to put it on the line and we're going to say, God, we'll do this. You're behind us. You're in front of us. You're going to provide what we need to be able to do this. And so, there's just a lot to talk about, but that's the short version, I hope.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you, for instance, just like when we arrived in Europe, we had nothing in our little apartment that we were going to be staying in. So one of the missionaries that picked us up from the airport said, well, we need to run by the grocery store, and of course we didn't have any euros on us and things, and he said, you can just pay me back, we'll go. And so we went, and I said, well, I guess we need some eggs and milk and whatever. Well, we were like, where's the freezer and things, and looking around. Well, their eggs and milk, you don't go to the refrigerator part, they're on the shelf. So that was an experience, and I'm like, we're supposed to drink this? You sure it's okay? And he's like, it'll be fine. So that was an experience. And so, of course, I smelled it and everything. And I'm like, to Andréa, where I come from off the farm, you refrigerate your milk. But, of course, when you open it, you have to put it in a refrigerator. But anyway, just different little things that you're, from the money exchange, you have to go to a certain bank. You have to make an appointment. Everything's an appointment that you have to do to buy a car. You have to make an appointment. If you want to drive one, they only have certain ones. You got to make an appointment. Then if you and everything, if you get more of a color in a car, it takes several months. If you just buy a regular car, it takes several months. Then you have to make an appointment to go pick it up, and it's like you're almost in a time zone that it's like you have to be patient. God has given me patience. Trust me. I like it done. I like it ahead. I got to get this done. I got to get that done. And I'll tell Andréa sometimes, I'm like, oh my word, I can't take waiting, but I am learning, and I have to pray about that. God, give me patience. This is not my culture. I never want to offend anybody, so.
Some of the things that we're seeing here now is just like a drop in the bucket compared to what actually is a day-to-day reality of people living in Europe. So if you start complaining about, the supply chain crisis, inflation, government regulation, you've only seen just a little tiny taste of what people have to experience in Europe. And when they had a lockdown, like say that last school year of 2020, 2021, Belgium did 4 different lockdowns for COVID. And when we say lockdown, I mean lockdown to where you about needed to have a document, like if you were going to a doctor or if you're going to a grocery store, you better be prepared even to maybe be pulled over by the police to verify that you had a reason to be out on the street going someplace. So, the visa applications and all of that was a nightmare.
And those are the circumstances that you're trying to further the kingdom in.
Right. And so, for instance, this Good Samaritan outreach program that they have in the video, which I guess we need to get to here pretty quick, you'll see this. Pélagie talks a little bit about it through the interpreter. But France, for instance, is so secular that they do not allow churches to have like food distributions in the name of the church, out of the church building. They call it a program. It'd be like here, like a nonprofit, like Convoy of Hope. A total separation between the church and what the people do of the church to help in humanitarian aid to these immigrants. So they had to create this Good Samaritan program. They have to have a total different location, different name. They cannot pass out literature from the church. That's illegal. And so they have to rely on like individual conversations, which thank God they can't outlaw like private conversations.
So in other words, they have to make disciples like the New Testament believers make disciples.
And I asked Samuel, and you don't see it in the video, but I kind of like ask him, tongue in cheek, you really have to depend on the Holy Spirit here, and you really have to pray, don't you? To reach the lost. And he kind of laughed a little bit. Yeah, we really do have to pray and depend on the Holy Spirit to work through our conversations. And what it does, though, I think, and we'll learn more about this when we get over there, I think it makes the church have to be more deliberate. You really have to try.
Well, you're right. I can't just
evangelize.
I can't just hand a stranger a tract and say, "Here, read this. Maybe the Lord will touch them later."
Right.
I have to actually engage them with the gospel.
In Belgium, a church cannot go to a park and set up a tent and preach without a government certificate to say that you're legally able to do that. And if you did, you still would not be able to preach against homosexuality. You could get arrested for that. Wow. Because the government has okayed homosexuality, so you can't openly preach against the government regulations.
Right. It's even Canada just upped their, punishment for people that do.
Yep.
But so really, you guys, I love that Mistad, rather than lowering the bar, they're increasing the resources to equip people. Mm-hmm. But so, Darla, you're going to be working with sex trafficking things, with feeding and clothing the immigrants, and doing administrative things in Mistad school. You're going to be teaching for Mistad and possibly getting connected with CTE seminary over there as well.
Yeah, because these students could do this bachelor's degree and go into CTS's master's program, because they have a master's program in French.
Right, so you guys are going to be busy.
Yeah.
Very busy. But that's all we've ever known is work. And
is there any other thing in life besides busy?
My 4 grandchildren, I'm like, I want to stay busy. My mind has to stay busy. And not only that, it's so overwhelming when you're over there that I had to give it to God, because when I'd walk down in that red light district and the sin, I mean, it could just take over. The worry that I'm only one person, we're just a team here, and there's such vast sin. But my director sat me down and said, you have to give it to God, or it will eat you alive. You won't get any rest at night. And I have given it to God, but pray. And, God is moving, but that's why as humans, we can't do it on our own. We have to pray. It is important to be at the altar. It is important to read your Bible. It's important every morning to do your devotions, say your prayers throughout the day. And, when you're there, it can really overtake, and so I look at it as where there is missionaries, we only have so many days of the week and so many hours in the day, and we need to do our part.
And I'd add to that what you can do for us. I mean, obviously we need finances. They increased our budget quite a bit, so we'll be here probably through July or August. Hopefully raise our budget by then.
And that's because they moved. When the last term they were in Brussels, and now they're in France.
Yeah.
And so that's
higher cost of living.
$4,000 a month.
More. Yeah.
Think about that.
Like
$4,000 a month more.
Probably $2,000 or more just for the basic cost of living, like an apartment. For instance, anywhere around Paris, an apartment that would be like 2 bedrooms, just a shower, very small square footage, would be anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 a month, just for a tiny apartment, So it's very expensive.
This past term, we lived with our bed in our living room. It's like a little studio, but it's okay.
But really,
we had everything we needed.
Besides that, I would say that we really need prayer, because Europe is a very dark place with these laws that I explained, and the demonic, the evil that goes on in these countries. We have noticed that when we went to Belgium, not that we weren't prayers, before we went, we've always prayed, all of our ministry. We've been involved in prayer times at churches and various, and just in our own personal lives. But there was a whole nother dimension to prayer when we went to Belgium, because you can almost feel the spiritual oppression when you land at the airport. I mean, if you're a spiritually discerning person, and then in different situations, you can tell, just with our visa situations with the professors that were teaching at CTS, there's a resistance to not just Christianity, but even within Christianity, there's a resistance to like Pentecostalism, and the traditions die hard. Traditions don't want to be discarded, and so traditions, I think, are oftentimes used by the enemy to keep certain aspects of the church from venturing out and doing more things in the spiritual realm, and it's really sad that if the demonic realm can use even like nominal Christians, for instance, to say, well, we don't want that in our society, we don't want that in our town, and then work behind the scenes to try to make it hard on churches for getting, leasing out buildings or buying a building or passing out literature or whatever they do through the laws, through the laws of the government to hinder the church from doing its work. But so that's why prayer, and if you can pray for missionaries, take our prayer card. We have a flyer out there. We have a prayer card. If you could just take a prayer card and our flyer and remember us in prayer. And, obviously it takes money. But even if we had the money, if we didn't have the prayers, the money would be in vain if we couldn't do anything in the spiritual realm. So
and
your prayers,
safety driving as well, because we drive a lot, and that our vehicle will uphold, all these miles that we have to drive the next months to come. So.
And for her, I do the navigation and she drives. So
most of the time, yeah. In Europe, we do that too. So.